We're grateful for the depth of analysis and the perspectives you've shared with us today. I now invite Professor David Attwell to offer his response to the lecture. Prof. Attwell is a professor emeritus at the University of York and serves as an extraordinary professor at the University of the Western Cape. He's an internationally recognized literary scholar, critic, and historian of South African literature, with particular expertise in post-colonial studies, Anglophone African writing, and the work of J.M. Coetzee. His academic career includes leadership roles such as the head of the Department of English at the University of York, as well as previous appointments at leading South African institutions, including the University of Witwatersrand and then the University of Natal. Prof. Attwell's scholarship has made a significant contribution to the study and global understanding of South African literary history. His publications include J.M. Coetzee and the Life of Writing, published in 2015, which was shortlisted for the prestigious Alan Paton Prize, which is South Africa's premier award for nonfiction, as well as Rewriting Modernity and the landmark volume, The Cambridge History of South African Literature, that was co-edited with Derek Attridge. His work is especially noticed for its rigorous engagement with literary archives, critical theory, and the historical development of literature across multiple South African languages, helping to shape contemporary scholarship in post-colonial and African literary studies. We are honored to have him reflect and engage with the ideas presented. Over to you, Prof. Attwell.
Thank you, Roshini, for those very kind words. And let me begin by thanking Daryl for a wonderfully thought-provoking, trenchant, in fact, and very intriguing lecture. The paper certainly rises to the challenge by responding to the dignity of the occasion, and it honors the memory of Alan Paton, who was both such an accomplished writer as well as a dedicated campaigner for social justice in South Africa during those immensely difficult years after 1948. So thank you, Daryl, and thank you to the Alan Paton Center and to the University of KwaZulu-Natal for hosting the lecture and for maintaining it in the university calendar. Daryl's paper provides an important new reading of Cry the Beloved Country. Isn't it interesting that this phrase is regularly quoted in our public sphere, especially when South Africans feel exasperated and let down, but it's not often the source is not often acknowledged or discussed. Daryl's paper discusses the novel and its reputation in an insightful and honest way, outlining its strengths and some of its weaknesses, or at least some of the criticisms. It doesn't shy away from that criticism, but it also argues convincingly that the central character, the Reverend Stephen Khumalo, quote, remains a foundational figure in South African letters, a poignant reminder of the human cost of institutionalized racism and the quest for spiritual regeneration in a broken land, unquote. Daryl then shows how this theme has endured, this topos or trope of the priest as a moral touchstone. It returns again and again in South African fiction, in the hands of writers from different generations and backgrounds. Zakes Mda using the art of the Catholic priest and Father Klahout to transform the figure of the sex worker Nikki into a Madonna figure and a symbol of regeneration. And Nkosinathi Sithole writing about a priest whose ministry is undermined by the harsh realities of poverty and hunger. Marguerite Poland, who narrates the story of the church's failure to support its African clergy, especially in the context of the late 19th century and a colonial war. And then Koos Kombuis, whose Dominee is a flawed character, whose religiosity is really just another form of apartheid repression. In all of these examples, Daryl shows us that the topos initiated by Alan Paton's powerful novel is repeated and reinterpreted as an enduring feature of South African literature across the generations and languages. Daryl, I'll turn to you now with a few questions. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, could you tell us how you arrived at this theme? And also, if you could share with us something of what it felt like to tackle it, because I sense that you are going against the grain to some extent, taking up a theme that is often ignored. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm not sure where exactly it came from, the idea, but, somewhere in my subconscious, I think people do know at UKZN that I've done 3 books on churches of South Africa. And I think maybe there's a part of me that, I come from a family of priests, actually, 3 generations of Indian priests. And maybe I was, something in me wanted to be a priest, but I chose the wrong word. And that is how I landed up here. But I began to think about this, because all my life I've always thought of Cry the Beloved Country as one of the great texts to come out of South Africa. And I was always shocked at the criticism it received. And then recently at the Alan Paton Festival, Ashwin Desai gave a paper saying that we are all liberals now. And he was suggesting that the pendulum has swung back towards liberal ideology. And so therefore I began to search for texts that might show the swing back to this kind of liberal ideology that Paton was criticized for. And what I tried to show was, that this liberal ideology exists in Zeksim Dar's work, doesn't get criticized as much, exists in Marguerite Poland's work, which is a text that's only about 8 years old and was largely was really well received, and I think won the Paton Prize, if I'm not mistaken. And what I tried to do, I tried to contrast that with Nkosinathi Sithole, who I felt was going against that grain, although he did create a character that his child in the book is a writer. And so he uses writing in the same way that Claire Holt is a painter. So that is what I was trying to do with the book. With the talk.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you so much. It does seem to me that Cry the Beloved Country, at least in its reception, was certainly, it suffered the fate of being published shortly before that fateful election of May 1948. It was published in February. And of course, the reception of the novel was influenced by everything that happened after that date. Whereas in fact, the novel was written in the last 3 months of 1946, when the country was at a different moment. It faced a sort of crossroads. And my sense is that Paton was exploring the choices that stood before the country at that point and filling his novel with the different voices of the public sphere at the time. It's not acknowledged enough that it's a deeply dialogic novel, full of different voices, competing voices, with Stephen Khumalo's voice being contrasted not only with his very corrupt brother, and are we still going to insist that there's no connection between populism and corruption? I don't think that objection has lasted very well. But also figures like Napoleon Letsisi, who's this young agricultural demonstrator who's